When you talk about radical self-love, what does that actually look like beyond the language that we see online now?
I think it's truly because in my coaching methodology, I have what's called the GLOW method, and it's an acronym. And O stands for overcoming external validation because even me now, like, because for instance, if I get a negative comment, I am not going to lie, it's like a punch in the face. Like it hurts and I need a second, but then I'm fine. And that's how you have to learn to live your life because there are always going to be people who don't like what you're doing, who don't agree with what you're doing. They don't understand what you're doing. They don't like your glasses. They don't like what you're wearing. They don't like your face. They don't like your hair. And you have to learn, like, when your focus is, am I happy with who I am? Am I being the best version of myself that I can possibly be? And when your focus is on you, you stop caring about that stuff. Like, again, it may affect you for like 30 to 60 seconds at a time, but it doesn't rule your life anymore. And I feel like that's what radical self love is because it's like, I do not give a shit what anyone else thinks because I love myself so much to do what's aligned with me.
Hi, everyone. Today's conversation is about identity and what happens when the life that we're living is built around approval rather than the truth. My guest today is Angie Hawkins, an inner glow coach and the author of Running in Slippers, a memoir about rebuilding after emotional rock bottom. Angie works with women who have done the therapy. They've read the books and followed the spiritual path, but still feel like something essential is missing, helping them move from chasing approval to living with a deeper self trust and confidence. In this conversation, we talk about what it means to stop performing for validation and start living from a place of truth and internal authority. Angie, I'm so glad that you're here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So, I think to start, I think the best way is let's talk a little bit about your rock bottom. What was happening in your life during that season that kind of led you into this whole process of?
There were definitely some acute things because it happened during COVID. So I don't think I have to explain that. But it was more chronic things that led up to it. And it started, and this is important because I'm going all the way back to my childhood, but it's because, most of my parents were emotionally unavailable, among other things. And as an adult, I can understand what that means. But as children, we don't have the tools like to interpret our situation and be able to understand adult dynamics. So I think a lot of us do this. We find ways to survive in those environments. So I developed a belief that I didn't deserve to be loved. And that is important because number one, it followed me my entire life. And number two, your limiting beliefs dictate your behaviors, and then your behaviors dictate what you experience in life. So, because I didn't believe that I was inherently worthy of love, I was always seeking it in things outside of myself. So, I was a textbook people pleaser. I was a perfectionist. I was always looking for things and people and awards and grades and work accolades to prove my worth. And anyone who has lived their life like that way knows it's a very exhausting way to live because you get the thing and that little hit of dopamine only lasts a short period of time and then you're on to the next thing. So it's like this constant hamster wheel. And I knew I was unhappy and fulfilled, but I didn't really know any other way to live. And because my limiting belief was around worth, I truly didn't even believe that I was worthy of happiness and fulfillment. So that is how I lived my life up until my rock bottom. And so it got to this point where, and I think we all have these situations in our life because there was a 2-year period where it was like thing after thing after thing. So on top of this like chronic stress, I had all these acute situations happen. And I finally got to this point where I was like, I can't take this anymore. When does this end? But on top of that was just this sheer feeling of hopelessness because if I looked in the past, nothing had been going well. And when I looked into the future, I truly did not see any hope for the future, which is such a dangerous place to be. And again, I was viewing it from this lens of like, I didn't even deserve to be loved. So it's like, what hope is there for the future for someone with that limiting belief? And so, yeah, that was my rock bottom.
Yeah, those are some really heavy unseen loads that we carry. And It is interesting how ever other people's approval in society has kind of it's that basis that so many of us live with. You described that there was a suicide attempt as a moment in your life that cracked everything open. And to be honest with you, without centralizing that entire moment, I really do want to talk a little bit about it though, because I feel like there is the audience that could really resonate in a certain aspect. Maybe they're not at that moment, but we all have those heavy loads. And when we carry those heavy loads, sometimes it leads to that thought. And so, what did it reveal to you about the way that you'd been living at that time that made you say, something is way off?
Yeah, and first of all, I really appreciate you providing the forum to speak on this because it is a heavily censored topic, which on one hand I understand because there are valid reasons for why it's censored, but on the other hand, so many people struggle with this and not a lot of people are talking about it. So I like to talk about it, number one, to let people know that they're not alone. Like if you're feeling a certain way, that is totally normal. It's part of being a human being and struggling in life because we all go through shitty things. But also, I like to speak about my experience because what leads you to that moment is that feeling of hopelessness. Because, and I've talked to other people, like they had the thoughts, but like for instance, I was talking to someone last week, like he was having the thoughts, but then he saw his cat.
Mhm.
And because when you're in that lowest moment, you just need one little glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have that. I was
Mm.
at home by myself and I was like, there is no hope for the future. And so I intentionally overdosed on my anxiety medication. And I spent a day and a half unconscious in my home. I spent another day and a half unconscious. Well, I wasn't totally unconscious in the hospital. I was like in and out of unconsciousness. But then I came home and I called a friend and I told her everything that happened. And she said to me, "It's not your time."
Mm.
And that was so profound that it actually made me think. And I was like, okay, I think I'm here for a reason. I don't know what that is. But in that moment, my mind made this switch from a victim mentality of like, these things are happening to me and I'm powerless against it. And that's just the way life is to, okay, I've been living life a certain way. It hasn't been, I want to live life a different way, and I'm accountable for making those changes. So it really, I just basically put the accountability on myself. Like I want to live life a different way, and I'm going to figure it out.
Well, first, let me say this, that I'm really glad that things worked out the way they did and that you're here and that you had a friend after to call and help you through that. I think that is so important. The responsibilities that we hold, they're so heavy and at times they're difficult to juggle. But I think that it's also important that that's really where some of our big leadership happens is when we learn to take that responsibility and grow from that. And so I'm grateful for that part of your story. When someone realizes that they've been living with approvals, there's a big massive identity shift that happens, I believe, and that we really start to, like you said, take that responsibility. What was that process of rebuilding looking like for you when you did that?
Yeah, so that's a good point because in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm just going to develop new habits and behaviors. And that in itself is very, very difficult. But through doing that, because I invested in myself and I hired a coach, so I did have the
Mm.
help. But in doing that, it's like I didn't even realize who I was. Like sometimes he would ask me questions like, what does your ideal life look like? Or, something like that. And I would be like, I have no idea because it's like I never even thought about it because I was just going through life checking off all the boxes of what society wants and what my family wanted. And I had never even asked myself, what do I want? What makes me happy? And so,
Mm.
yeah, it was a huge identity shift. And as part of that, because I was working in corporate America, which was part of my path of just checking off the boxes and following society's arbitrary rules of going to college and getting a degree and finding the stable corporate job, I found myself in a place where it's like, oh my God, I built my life around like not even me. Because I would had been living for other people. And so I ended up quitting corporate America and starting my inner glow coaching business because that was aligned with who I was.
Ooh, that's a big shift. That's,
Yeah.
and that can be kind of scary in itself. I really love that you took that leap. I think that you have to find that authentic person in you and what gives you that joy and really brings it out in you. So I love that for you. I just kind of want to go back for a second though, because I think that we're all going to have our things that we use as our tools to rebuild. And I hear it often when we do these interviews that everybody has their way of doing it. But I am always so curious because I know I had mine. I know that I have my own story and what I did to rebuild. But I would love to hear maybe what some of those tools that you use to help rebuild that self in you and identify who that authentic person was. Because, sometimes, as you know, when you're at rock bottom, you don't know which way is left or right or even where to start to begin. So, if we can help somebody paint that picture, I know that we don't want to focus too much on that. I do think that's a great tool to really give.
Yeah, so the when I hired a coach, it's funny because the coach I hired was actually a men's dating coach, and I had met him at a healing intensive, and we connected on Instagram, but he didn't teach pickup artist type stuff. Like he was teaching men how to be the best versions of themselves so that they could attract someone at that level. So he was talking about authenticity and all of these things, and I was like, okay, that's what I want. So I hired him, and his whole coaching methodology is based on what he called being a functional adult. Because again, like we have these like beliefs and behavior patterns that we developed as children and teenagers to survive in those environments. But as adults, they no longer serve us. So it felt kind of ridiculous at the time, but it's like, I like this is how you are become a functional adult. And a lot of it was behavior modifications, like, for example, setting boundaries or doing things for me instead of for other people's approval. But over time, in changing my behaviors and habits, I actually started to develop these beliefs like I deserve to be respected because I was treating myself with respect, or I deserve to trust myself because I was proving to myself through these actions, like, yes, I can figure things out. I can handle uncertainty. I can handle challenges. So, through developing this self-respect and self-trust, like I slowly started to love myself and truly believe that I deserved it. And that's what I call the inner glow because there wasn't like a light bulb moment. It was just like over time, I just started to feel like this energetic warmth in my chest that was radiating outward. And I finally realized I was like, oh, I'm like basking in my own self love. And so through modifying my behaviors and habits, I was actually reprogramming my beliefs to believe the truth because the truth is I do deserve to be loved, but I had let that other limiting belief run the show for most of my life.
It is amazing that we go through life and we have no idea the things that we experience or that we go through. They really program us from like day one. And
Yeah.
it's not until later that we realize, oh, is that really us? Are we showing up authentically, or are we just showing up because this is what we're told to do, or how we were taught? So it is really interesting to hear you talk about it that way. Many people say that they want to be authentic, though, which can be terrifying, though, especially if they don't know what that is. What makes authenticity so difficult to practice, do you think?
Well, because when you are shining, some people enjoy it. Some people get very triggered by it. And that's like part of my story of leaving corporate America because I would love to say like I had this epiphany that it wasn't authentic to me, so I just up and quit. No, I had the epiphany, but I was still too attached to my paycheck and the benefits, and I was like, "No, I'm just gonna hang around here a little bit longer." But I was transferred to this team, and my manager hated me, and I didn't understand why, but I remember one time we were talking, and I made a comment. I was like, "I do at least one thing a day that brings me joy," and I was like, "My one thing is surfing, so I take a break from work and go surfing." After that day, she hated me even more, and she was so mean to me, and I finally realized, like, she was so miserable in her own life, she could not stand that I was happy. So my point is, when you are shining in your true authenticity, there are people who are hate it. I actually just posted something on Instagram, was it yesterday? I get so many when I put myself online and I'm shining in my authentic self, you wouldn't believe how many people they criticize my glasses, they criticize my face, they criticize who I am. And it is not easy. It is not for the weak. But so I think a lot of people are afraid to shine in their authentic selves because you do get a lot of people who are miserable in their own life and they cannot stand it and they will take it out on you. And it's not easy. I will be the first person to say it.
You know what? I will absolutely agree with you. Like my head is falling off my neck just nodding right now because
Yeah.
I experience that as well. And I think the more that we win, the more that we are happy, the more people want that themselves, but they don't know how to grasp that. And so I absolutely get that. And for the record, for those that are listening but not watching, Angie is as cute as a button. She's got this beautiful red hair, which I've always wanted red hair like my entire life. I think it's just beautiful, and you've got these beautiful red glasses. So she's just shining. Like she's glowing. Like she's got her red light going off of her. So uh
Thank you.
when
But see, this is why I do it because the people who are meant for me get it and are drawn to me, and that's all I care about.
absolutely. I love that. Yes. Yes, 100% yes. When you talk about radical self-love, what does that actually look like beyond the language that we see online though? Because online can be so deceiving. And you've got your haters we just talked about,
Yeah.
but what does that look like?
I think it's truly because in my coaching methodology, I have what's called the GLOW method, and it's an acronym. And O stands for overcoming external validation because even me now, like, because for instance, if I get a negative comment, I am not going to lie, it's like a punch in the face. Like it hurts and I need a second, but then I'm fine. And that's how you have to learn to live your life because there are always going to be people who don't like what you're doing, who don't agree with what you're doing. They don't understand what you're doing. They don't like your glasses. They don't like what you're wearing. They don't like your face. They don't like your hair. And you have to learn, like, when your focus is, am I happy with who I am? Am I being the best version of myself that I can possibly be? And when your focus is on you, you stop caring about that stuff. Like, again, it may affect you for like 30 to 60 seconds at a time, but it doesn't rule your life anymore. And I feel like that's what radical self love is because it's like, I do not give a shit what anyone else thinks because I love myself so much to do what's aligned with me.
I have to tell you, after I was sick and I started writing, a lot of people were saying, not a lot, but there were people that reached out to me and said, "Well, where's your integrity? You're just trying to." I've heard it all from, you're buying your way, blah blah blah. And I'll be honest with you, they hurt because they don't live the story that you go through
Yeah.
every single day. And for me, all I wanted was just to show up for myself, for my kids, for others, because when you're in those moments, you don't know if that's your last. And so you appreciate things so very differently. And so to show up and have somebody say that is like, it's like it's like somebody harming you. It feels like a stab to the chest. And there were moments when that would happen in the beginning that I would just cry, and I would ask my husband, "Why am I doing this? What's the point if all I'm gonna do is be, ridiculed when I could just be here with my family, be happy, and just be grateful to be alive?" But it is those moments when they show up, and you do help people or you see the impact that you make. My point, I guess, in saying all this is when those moments would happen for me, though, I have a picture on my mirror, and it's of my family and it's of my boys. And there are moments in my life that I go back to mentally, and I can trigger to say, this is my why. This is what I do. Is there something that you do when you are trying to show up authentically in the world? And obviously, people are going to come after that. What do you do for yourself to glow? Because everybody is going to be different. But again, I love to share these tools because someone's going to need to find that somehow. For me, it's looking at the why. What's yours?
Yeah, and I think that's the important anchor that everyone should have. And my why is I almost died and it's like I'm here for a reason. I still don't really know what that is, but I want to touch as many people as possible. And if that means that 80% of the people I touch hate me and have something horrible to say about me, I really don't care because then I'm still touching 20% and helping them.
I love that. I think that it comes down to what makes you happy and gives you joy in your life. And
Exactly.
if you know what that is and you can focus on that, that really brings that authenticity of why you do what you do. And it shows that purpose through that. What helped you move from survival and self protection into the confidence and self trust? Obviously, we talked about the glow. Was there other things?
Well, I do think even if you don't know what your true overall purpose is, I do think you have to have something that keeps you anchored in a purpose. Because, for example, after I got out of the hospital, I was like, I need help. And like for me, traditional therapy had never worked. So that's why I invested in myself and hired a coach. And I knew doing the work with him would take time because, like, I initially bought like a 6-month package and I knew it was going to take like at least 6 months. And it even took longer than that because I continued working with him. But in those initial days, I was like, I needed something because my only goal was to make it through the day. Like, that's how much I was struggling.
Yeah.
And on our first coaching session, he was like, if you didn't have to worry about money or anything, what would you do? And I had this idea for a book. I was like, I want to write a memoir, but, a lot of memoirs, it's about, "Oh, this is all the great stuff I did and all my successes," but I was like, "I wanna write about" because we all go through shitty things, we're just not talking about it, so I was like, "I wanna write about, like, the hard things and the challenges," and, like, the entire goal of the book would be connection through vulnerability, and then I was like, "And then I wanna go on these book tours that are, like, safe spaces for people to be vulnerable and talk about this kind of stuff." And he was like, "Did you see how lit up you just got when you were talking about it?" And I did feel my state change. So in that moment, because the book had been an idea for I think several years at that point,
Yeah.
but in that moment, I was like, "I'm going to write the book." And that became my purpose because it just gave me a sense of purpose writing it and then even publishing it. So I think you need to have something that like lights you up and gives you purpose.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree. That was part of my story as well. You know, yeah, I think that today, people need purpose, and I think it's just showing up to be happy with that. I had a small brain fart right there because I was thinking about all of the things that, I think this story that you have, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing this because I think people tend to go through life and we have moments where we're lost and we think that we have to be ready or we have to be, we have to do something big before we can show up in certain ways. And I love that your memoir, you just showed up and you allowed that to show you purpose and to give you that next path. I always talk about you don't have to behold a lead. And that's exactly what I'm referring to because once you just start showing up and doing the work, the rest shows its way.
Yes.
You help women who have done the work themselves, but they still feel a little bit stuck. What patterns do you see most often when you're working with these women?
I feel like they're still searching for something outside of themselves to give them the answers. For instance, and I used to do this too, so I'm like not knocking anything I'm about to say, but self-help books, they give you a lot of information, but in terms of like practical how to implement it in your day-to-day life because we're all so different. So like these books are speaking to the masses and it doesn't really have like the nuance of your day-to-day responsibilities. So it's kind of like, well, I don't really know what to do with this, so I'm not going to do anything. Or a lot of spiritual practices. And again, I'm not knocking things because I like certain spiritual practices, but I do them in conjunction with the inner work. But if you're just expecting this thing to heal you and take away your pain and heal your trauma, like there's just way more to it than that. So they're really missing the inner work aspect of it.
Yeah. What does a healthy self-leadership look like for someone who's rebuilding their identity?
Like, there's so much to it, but I'm just gonna go back to and I know this, like, sounds simplistic because it is a whole process, but it's just stop focusing on what's going on around you and focus on you. Because even within your day, you're constantly making decisions, and at those each of those points, you can be like, "What do I want? Like, what makes me happy? Like, what feels aligned with me?" Because everyone else is going to have an opinion about what you're doing, but only you know what's best for you. And a huge component of my coaching program is tapping into your intuition because we all have intuition. And if you think about it, it's such a magical thing because it's our internal knowing. We have all of the answers, and all you have to do is plug into it. But we've been conditioned to question ourselves, and this person knows better because they're the expert, quote unquote. And so, like, we lose trust in ourselves, but all you have to do is tap into it. And that doesn't mean you can't ask someone for advice or whatever, but you have to filter it through that lens of discernment because at the end of the day, only you know what's best for you. So it's all about just turning that focus back on you and what you want and what's aligned for you.
Yeah. I think it's important to also have boundaries too, to
Oh, for
hold
sure.
that. And sometimes, boundaries, they struggle with those because they sometimes feel rejection that comes with that.
Yeah.
What helped you to hold some of your boundaries without having the guilt of doing all of that? Because I know some people, as they're learning what boundaries are, comes with it is the guilt.
Yes. So this is something I learned in my own practice. So this is what I teach to my women. I don't ever teach anyone, this is how you set boundaries without guilt. I teach people, this is how you set boundaries. And if and when you feel guilt, this is how you deal with the feelings of guilt. Because we're human beings, we all have feelings. And I think it's 100% natural to feel guilty when setting boundaries, especially like for me. I always felt guilt, like, setting a boundary with my mom because, like, that was the hardest person in my life, and you know what I mean? But and I would criticize myself for that and feel bad about it and, like, "Why am I feeling this way?" But when I step back from it, it's like, "Why wouldn't I feel that way?" So, you really have to learn to accept that part of yourself because and through this whole process, you learn like negative feelings, they're only negative because you're looking at it that way. And it's like the resistance to that feeling is what's making it feel negative. But I teach women how to feel safe in their body while feeling these feelings. And that's what makes it so much easier.
Mm, I appreciate that. Angie, I really appreciate this conversation about internal authority and what it looks like compared to a life being built around validation. I ask this to all of my guests that are on the show. For those that are listening today and they're living a life that looks like it has to have approval instead of that truth, what is one step that they could take with them this week as they go forward after this conversation?
This may seem kind of unrelated, but I do this in my own personal life and I teach this to everyone I talk to. Do at least one thing a day that brings you joy. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, my thing is surfing. That can be kind of time intensive. So this doesn't have to be a thing that takes up hours of your day. So for example, when I don't have a lot of time, I just throw on a song and dance. And most songs are only like 3 or 3.5 minutes long. So this does not have to be a huge like ceremony or ordeal. But the reason why this is important, one, you deserve to be happy. So, and it conditions you that you deserve to be happy. And that just helps you get in that mindset when you come to these decision points. Like, because when you start connecting to your happiness and joy, you start wanting that more in your life. So then when you come to these decision points, you're kind of like, I want to do the thing that makes me happy. It is a process, but I mean, who doesn't want to have happiness and joy in their day? So you have fun in the process as well.
I'm so grateful for this conversation. I hate the thought that people go through those dark moments and with those heavy unseen loads. And so I believe, just like you said, we all deserve the joy and the happiness, and finding that is really important in our life. So I'm grateful. I believe that this will help at least one listener out there, and that's why we do the work.
Exactly.
Where can people find you after this conversation? Because I think that someone's going to need a little bit extra step.
The best place to find me is my website, which is Inner Glow by Angie. So there's information about my book. It has the two social media platforms I'm most active are Instagram and YouTube. And there's also information about my coaching program, which is called the Identity Upgrade. And I used to offer a free Find Your Glow session. I do not do that anymore. I have a signature glow session, which is application only. But if you fill out the application and say that you heard me on this podcast, you will get a free signature glow session, which is a 60-minute call. And G of my GLOW method stands for go back to your childhood. So we will identify your core limiting belief because, again, like mine was I didn't deserve to be loved. Everybody has that one that everything else is spawning off of. So we will identify that one core limiting belief. And even if we don't continue to work together, like that's a really big step, whether you go to a therapist or do some work on your own, but like identifying that belief and healing that at the core is a huge first step. So just say that you heard me on this podcast.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate it. For all those listening, don't forget, you don't have to be whole to lead. Just root in your truth, realign with what matters, and rise with the responsibility that you have with that and take it where it needs to go. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.